A long, long time ago, God was a little bored, so he started to create stuff. Over 6 days, he made light, sky, water, land, shrubbery, the sun and moon, fish and birds, animals, and then people. And then, after about 6 days of solid work, I guess he got a little tired, so he had a break for a day. There was this lovely garden that God had made for the two people to chill out in. There was a bunch of animals, and there were also a few trees that they could eat the fruit from. But there were two important rules. One of these trees was the tree of life, which our buddies Adam and Eve could eat from. But there was another tree called the tree of good and evil, which God said, "Oi, see that tree? Don't eat from this tree." But then this snake thingy kind of came over and got them to eat from this tree anyways. And now they're not allowed in the garden anymore because they did the thing that God said no to. It's almost like humans are going to be falling, and it's going to become a theme. All the people were suddenly really evil, but he saw this one guy called Noah who was pretty chill, and he was very good because he was a man of God. So God got him to build an ark, which was a big, big ark. So 75 years later, all of a sudden, the animals started showing up in pairs in this big long line. And after they all got in, there was a bunch of rain that lasted for 40 days and 40 nights. Then once the water left, they kind of all just left. And God promised to never flood the earth again with this big, cool rainbow. It's almost like humans are going to keep falling. Now, it may not seem crazy, but everyone back then spoke the same language. And one day, people got kind of bored, so they made plans to build this massive tower. And they kind of just started building it all just together. But then God saw it and was like, if they can do that, then they might not want to follow me anymore. So he kind of just made them all speak different languages so they were all confused, and then no one could build the tower anymore. Kind of weird. It's almost like humans keep falling. But don't worry, because God hadn't chucked humanity out the window just yet. He had a plan to save everyone. There was this guy called Abram, and Abram was kind of told by God to leave everything behind that he ever knew and go follow him wherever the Lord told him to go. Even though Abram was about 75 years old, he went anyways. God told him they would become a great nation, but he didn't say this part directly, but he also hinted at a guy named Jesus who would come and save everyone. That could also become a theme. So 5 years later, Abram landed in the land of Canaan. He didn't have any kids yet, and he was going to be promised he was going to be a great nation. So when Abram was talking to God, God kind of told him that he would get children, and he now had a new name called Abraham. About 20 years later, Isaac was born. Isaac was the son of Abraham. When Isaac was about 35 years old, which is really old, by the way, God tested Isaac's dad by telling him to go sacrifice Isaac on the top of a mountain somewhere. But as Abraham was about to do so, God provided a ram to sacrifice instead, which saved our poor boy Isaac's life. A little bit after that, Isaac got married to a lady called Rebecca, and they were both blessed with twins. They had two kids called Jacob and Esau. Jacob's story is a pretty odd one. He was the second born, but really should have been the firstborn. His older brother Esau was a very hairy man, and one day Esau came back hunting, tired and literally starving. When he smelt the smell of the soup Jacob was cooking, he wanted it so badly that he literally traded his birthright for it. That's a high price to pay for a bowl of soup. But that's not all Jacob did. When their father Isaac was about to die, he sent Esau out to go on a hunt to catch some game to prepare Esau for his blessing. But before Esau returned, Jacob made himself hairy and tricked Isaac into giving him Esau's blessing. Esau was understandably very furious and wanted to kill Jacob, so their mother sent Jacob away. Later, Jacob wrestled with God to prove himself and to legitimate his blessing and birthright. Joseph was the 11th of 12 brothers in a big, big family, and he was the son of Jacob, and Jacob had a favorite, Joseph. Jacob even gave him a rainbow cloak, which made his brothers very jealous. Joseph even had dreams that made them even angrier. So they tore off his cloak and threw him into a well, and then sold him, where he was brought to Egypt, where somehow Joseph worked his way up to become Pharaoh's right-hand man after warning Pharaoh about 7 years of famine. When his family back home ran out of food, they went out to Egypt searching for food. Eventually, they realized that the man in charge was their brother Joseph, and their whole family of 70 moved to Egypt. Jacob's family loved Egypt so much they stayed there for 400 years. Over time, a new pharaoh came to power who didn't know anything about Joseph or what he did. So he enslaved them and began killing the newborn baby boys to stop them from growing too strong. One day, a guy called Moses was born. His mum didn't want him to die, so she put him in a basket in the Nile, where he somehow drifted his way to Pharaoh's daughter. He grew up in Pharaoh's palace, and one day he ran away and became a shepherd. When a burning bush called him back to free his people from slavery, he made up some dumb excuses, and after God did what he wanted, he went back. Even though he was 80 years old, he did it anyways. God gave Moses some pretty basic instructions, like some stuff to do with his stick turning into a snake. But we're mainly going to focus on the plague side of things. When Moses and his brother Aaron went to see Pharaoh, they said some stuff to get the Israelites away from Egypt. But Pharaoh said no. So Moses said, if you don't let us go, the Nile will turn to blood. And the next day, the Nile turned to blood. This thing repeated for 9 more days. I'll go over the others really quickly. Frog skin gnats, also known as lice, flies, death of livestock, oils, hail, locusts, darkness, and then finally death of the firstborn. The first Passover happened the night every firstborn was going to die. The Israelites were told to sacrifice a lamb and adorn their doorways with blood, and then cook the lamb and eat it with unleavened bread. The reason the doorways were adorned with the lamb's blood was so that the angel of death would not kill the firstborn of that home.
After that, Pharaoh was devastated by the loss of his son, so he finally let the Israelites go. But within a day of the Israelites leaving, Pharaoh, being the most indecisive person ever, changed his mind again and pursued them with chariots and an army. But just as it seemed like the Israelites were cornered at the Red Sea, Moses showed off God's power by splitting the Red Sea to allow the Israelites to escape Pharaoh's grasp. Once they were safely away from Pharaoh, they went on their way to the Promised Land, also known as the Land of Canaan. While the Israelites were on their way to the Promised Land, God called Moses to the top of Mount Sinai, where he kind of said, "You see the people that you took out of Egypt? I want them to be my people." So Moses told the people, and they said, "Yeah, we want to be God's people." And then Moses was given the 10 Commandments. More on that story later. And a little while later, after that, God gave Moses instructions to make a portable temple called the Tabernacle. He wanted the Tabernacle to be made because even though people are sinful, God wants to be with his people no matter what. I can definitely take something out of that. More on the story in the 10 Commandments. While Moses was still on the top of the mountain receiving the 2 tablets that God was engraving with the law of the covenant on it, he found out that his brother Aaron had made golden calves for the people to worship because Moses was away for too long. Even though he had only been away for 40 days. When Moses saw the sight of the golden calves, he was filled with so much rage and anger that he smashed the 2 tablets that were engraved by God and burnt the golden calf to the ground. He then ground it up into powder, mixed it with water, where any Israelite that had worshipped the calf was made to drink it. When the Israelites were about to enter the Promised Land, Moses sent out 12 spies to check out the land. When they came back, 10 of them said that the people were giants and were way too strong, even though the land was really good. Only 2 of them said that they should go in and trust God anyways. But everyone listened to the majority, and they all said that they would rather go back to Egypt. So God got very angry and said that the entire generation would not enter the Promised Land and would be wandering in the wilderness instead for 40 years. I feel like that's a lesson for all of us, to trust God's plan and not doubt it. I know I can take something out of that. There isn't too much to talk about. It's mainly them just wandering in the wilderness for 40 years until everyone in the generation had died, except for the 2 spies that trusted in God's plan, Joshua and Caleb. They would be the only 2 out of the entire generation that would enter the Promised Land. Joshua was one of the original 12 spies, but would later become the leader of the Israelites. Eventually, everyone died, including Moses, and the Israelites were finally ready to enter the Promised Land. As the Israelites were about to come to the Promised Land, they faced one more obstacle, the Jordan River. But God had a plan. The priests were told to carry the Ark of the Covenant into the water. As the priests stepped into the water, the river began to stop flowing, and a wall of water began to build up. One by one, each Israelite entered the Promised Land, but they still had one more thing they all needed to do, and that was to drive out the people that had settled in the Promised Land since Jacob's family had left. Jericho was the first major city in the Promised Land that the Israelites had to take down. But the problem was, this city was impenetrable and couldn't just be stormed. So God gave Joshua quite an unusual plan. Every day for the next 6 days, they were told to walk around the city with the Ark of the Covenant. Every day for the next 6 days. And then on the 7th day, they were told to walk around the city 7 times. After that, they were told to shout while trumpets sounded. And then the city walls began to crumble. After Joshua died, there wasn't a king or government, so everyone did what was right in their own eyes. The cycle went like this. They disobeyed God, were attacked by another nation, cried out to God, and he sent a judge to rescue them. The judges were often very flawed. Samson, one of the judges, disobeyed God and acted very selfishly. Gideon doubted God and later made an idol. Jephthah made a foolish vow and caused tragedy. After about 500 years of judges coming to power to help the Israelites and lead them down the right path, the Israelites were sick and tired of having judges, so the people cried out to Samuel, the last judge, to establish a king to lead them. Samuel warned the people that a king would be horrible for the Israelites, but they wanted one anyways. So God chose a guy called Saul, who Samuel anointed to become the king of Israel. At the start, Saul seemed to be great and seemed to be perfect, but then he fell out with Samuel and God, sinned really badly, and eventually David would come to take his place as the next king. God chose David when he was just a teenager, and Samuel anointed him. When Saul was having a problem with one of the enemy soldiers, also known as Goliath, little David came up to him, got out his sling, and struck Goliath with one of the stones. This killed Goliath, making David a war hero among the Israelites. But Saul grew jealous of David and tried to kill him multiple times, but never could quite catch him. When Saul died, David became the next king of Israel. God also told David that his line would rule forever through Jesus, who was coming later down the line, to save everyone. Solomon was the son of King David and became the 3rd king of Israel. When he became king, he had a dream where God asked him that he could have anything he wanted, and God would give it to him. He could have asked for anything, money, riches, kingdoms, but out of everything he could have chosen, he picked wisdom. Since Solomon picked wisdom, God gave him riches and power. Solomon was also given the honor of building the Lord's temple as a dwelling place for God. But Solomon wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. He had 700 wives and 300 other women called concubines. Since Solomon had so many wives, and him being the people pleaser that he is, he built Asherah poles and places for his wives to worship other gods. This also led Solomon and the people of Israel to worship idols, which is one of God's things not to do. So God said that he would punish Solomon by taking most of the kingdom away from him, but he wouldn't do it in his lifetime. He would do it in his sons. After that, Judah became the southern kingdom, along with Benjamin, and most of the other tribes became the northern kingdom of Israel. Even though the kingdom split, God's promise wasn't forgotten. One day a savior, Jesus, would come from the line of David, the tribe of Judah, to redeem his people. You might think that Israel would be good because God tore most of the kingdom away from Solomon's son. But you wouldn't be more wrong. They were horrible. They didn't even follow God. The king made 2 golden calves and put them in the north of Israel and one in the south of Israel, and they completely fell out with God. Now you might think that Judah would be good, but they were also horrible. They fell away from God and practiced other religions. Judah had a few good kings, but most of them were terrible. God sent prophets to warn the kingdoms to come back to him. Some of the prophets were Elijah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Hosea, and Amos. Now, God wasn't going to put up with his people not following him anymore. After many prophets came and went, God pulled the plug on Israel and another nation, Assyria, came to take over Israel. The Assyrians attacked the capital city of Israel, Samaria, and it was destroyed. Most of the people from Israel were taken back to Assyria. After that, the people of Israel mixed with other people, and the Israel kingdom was no more. Now, you might think that the kingdom of Judah would have learnt from what happened to the kingdom of Israel, but they didn't. Judah continued to worship idols, even after Israel was completely destroyed. God sent many prophets to warn them, especially Jeremiah, but the people and the king ignored the warnings. Eventually, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon invaded the southern kingdom of Judah. The Babylonian army surrounded Jerusalem and starved the city for months. When the people were at their weakest, the Babylonians attacked. They killed many, destroyed buildings, burnt the temple. After that, they took the survivors into exile in Babylon, where they remained for 70 years. Being in exile sucked for the kingdom of Judah. They had no freedom, no temple, no king. During the 70 years, it felt like God had completely abandoned them. Prophets like Jeremiah and Ezekiel tried to encourage them to stay faithful and reminded them that God had not abandoned them. Eventually, Babylon was conquered by Persia. King Cyrus was moved by God's spirit, so he sent money as well as temple goods that had been taken when Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the temple. King Cyrus ordered that any Jew that wanted to return to rebuild the temple was allowed to do so. Once the Jewish people returned to Judah, they began to rebuild the temple. Later on, under Nehemiah, they also rebuilt the city walls to protect themselves. When the temple was finished, they started to follow God's laws again, but they still had some reoccurring sin. God sent another set of prophets to encourage them, challenge them, and remind them to stay faithful. Some of these prophets were Haggai, Zechariah, and Micah. This timeline is probably best summed up with this one Bible verse. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. Even after all the times the Israelites fell away from him, he remained faithful. God saved his people by sending his Son, Jesus, to redeem those who would put their faith in him. Despite our sin, Jesus is the fulfillment of the promise God made to Abraham, David, and his people through the Old Testament. We can trust God's plan and his love for us even when we mess up.